Again. Hey folks, back again here. Notice that I was on mute there again. Mistake I made on the very first episode, and I'll probably make it again. That's because I've been away so long, and that was my comment to you. It's been a little bit of time since I've been back online, and basically it's just been really, really busy. Hard to get some of these episodes in with so many things going on. But I want to thank everybody who's going to be watching this today, and do me a favor. I always ask people this in the comments section. Type in where you're from. I always like to know where people are watching from. I see David has already typed something in there, so he's ahead of the curve. So yeah, let us know what country or what city you're watching from. It's always great to hear. Also, make sure that if you do watch Forensics Talks or you have watched it before, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and you'll always get the notification. You know, I do this just because I enjoy doing it. There's no sponsors, there's no nothing like that. I don't ask you for anything. This is just informative and educational. Also, don't forget that we do put these on podcast version. So if you have Apple or Google Podcasts or one of those things, you can always go ahead and you know, listen to past episodes while you're working, while you're driving, whatever the case might be. Okay. Also, I'm just going to share some things with you here, but we have some upcoming training, just a couple of little announcements. So one is Recon 3D. So many of you know that I am the developer of Recon 3D, and that is an iPhone scanning application. Just recently, I posted something online having to do with forensic pathology. So something similar to what we'll be talking about today. That was on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in using an iPhone or an iPad, a LiDAR enabled device for scanning, then, you know, this is probably the app that you're going to want to be looking at. So yeah, have a look at that when you're ready. The training is going to happen on June 12th. It's $299, and we go through everything from, you know, start to finish, go through the basics, and talk about best practices on scanning and all kinds of different things. Also, the other thing that I was showing was Vision 3D. So if you get a chance, we did a launch on that. That's a Windows product for sharing scans and things like that. But if you go to the Recon 3D website, just go to the tab that says Vision 3D, and you can learn some more information about what we've got going on there. Okay, good there. What else did I want to talk about? Oh yeah, I forgot. So just about a week or so ago, I released my very first iOS app. So it's an app, it's on the App Store, it's free, and it's available. And it's a very simple app. It's called Pixel Scale. And what you do is you import an image. If you have a ruler in the image, and of course you have to take the photo at 90 degrees to the surface, you can scale it. So basically you add a scale between 2 points, and then it allows you to measure other things in the image. And this is all on your iPad or on your iPhone. And from there, what you can do is you can export the image with the scale and the measurement on it. So this is just one of the screenshots that you can get out of it. And then you can get a full res image, the JPEG image with the overlay dimensions and that sort of thing. So that was just a personal development project. But again, it's freely available on the App Store if you want. I'm pretty proud of it, the fact that I got through and to do this. So yeah, have a look at that and have some fun with it. Okay. All right, we're going to get right into this, and we're going to talk about our guest, and that is Dr. Robert Kurtzman. And I first met Robert through the Forensic Photography Symposium that we've been hosting, for 4 years now. So he's been in attendance a couple times before now. And Dr. Kurtzman is a board-certified forensic pathologist. He's got over 4 decades of experience in forensic medicine, pathology, and death investigation. He holds a Doctor of Osteopathy degree from Des Moines University, and he's completed specialized training in forensic pathology at the Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office under the renowned Dr. Werner Spitz. Now, Dr. Kurtzman has served as the chief medical examiner for the state of Montana and was instrumental in modernizing its forensic infrastructure. His work spans rural and high altitude environments. We're definitely going to be talking about that today. And he's conducted numerous investigations into deaths involving things like lightning strikes, altitude sickness, and environmental hazards. He continues to consult and teach on forensic pathology and high altitude death investigation, and he's recognized for his contributions to improving death certification systems and public safety awareness. And something else you may not know, there's 2 things that he does, and one is he's an excellent photographer and he is an avid skier. So I'm sure he's excellent at both of those. So let me bring him in here. Hey there, Robert. How are you?
Hey, Eugene. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks so much for being here today and, just sharing your time and your experiences and everything else. We got a few people. Let's see, we got people from the UK, we got people from Texas, we got people from Canada here, ready to listen to you. So, yeah, thanks a bunch. I think what
Thank
we'll
you.
do, yeah, I think we start normally, with people's backgrounds and things like that. But I want to talk to you about photography because I know you're an avid, photographer, and I've seen some of your work. It's pretty amazing. Um, what what was the first, sort of, introduction to photography for you?
Well, the first introduction for photography was from a cousin of mine who was considerably older, and he had a darkroom in his basement. And I remember seeing him flash the enlarger onto just a white piece of paper, and then tossing that paper into the tray of developer, and just seeing this image just appear out of nowhere. And so I was sort of hooked. And when I was 8 years old, my folks got me, at that time was a company called FR Developing Kit. And so as an 8-year-old with a camera and a little developing kit, it was, off to the races.
All
It's
right.
science and creativity all wrapped up in one.
And do you? I'm going to show this here in a second, but you're very passionate about like landscape photography. Is that your main passion right now?
Yeah, I really enjoy landscape photography a lot. Photomicroscopy is a lot of fun. Architecture. It's a good way to take a look at things in a closer way.
Yeah.
So
Um, Yeah, I just want to point people to the website here. It's just robkurtzman.com. And so, people, if you get a chance, not right now because we got to do the interview, but when you get a chance, you can pop over there and then have a look. And what I'll do is I'll just put this into the chat window so people can go have a look after. But yeah, he's got a ton of different types of photographs and things. And it's sort of interesting because you're a forensic pathologist, but you do photography too. So do you do all your own photographs too?
I do.
Yeah, okay.
And that varies, of course, from location to location. Generally, where I've worked outside of a couple of places, um, there haven't been dedicated photographers, and so usually it's pretty easy for me to snap my own images.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's talk about your beginnings, into forensic pathology and how you got started. And I always like asking this question, mostly for people who are, in academia or some of the young people who are starting out on their careers. And sometimes just you land in a place where you didn't think you might have been. And so, I like hearing about how people got started. So, did you come from a family of doctors, or what was the influence there?
My stepdad was a general practice doc in Lancaster, actually in Conestoga, Pennsylvania, which is just about 8 miles south of Lancaster, and he had a rural practice. And I anticipated going into pediatrics, but then during my training, I discovered pathology, and that was a quick decision to change course. Pathology is really visual, and there's more concepts and principles, and you can take a look at things through the microscope, and it's really pretty fascinating. And so, visually, you look at things through the microscope. In many ways, it's like photography, maybe slightly different in terms of the workflow. So, in pathology, when you're looking at a slide, unless you've looked through a microscope for a long time, there's nothing intuitive about what you're looking at. It's completely abstract, and ultimately you have to learn about that. Of course, growing up, seeing trees and mountains and clouds and things of that sort, that's all very intuitive. We know exactly what it is. So for photography, composing an image is just taking a look at things which are very objective, and then arranging them in a way that it's subjectively pleasing. With pathology, it's looking at things that at first are completely abstract, and then recognizing the characteristics that lead to an objective conclusion that could be used for diagnosis or treatment, things of that sort. And the same thing can be said for forensic pathology too, because pathology in the realm of forensics involves looking at pattern and distribution of injury, which relates to the mechanism by which that injury might have been sustained.
Okay.
So,
And did you know right off the bat, like, you were going to kind of head down, like, what was your first introduction to the whole forensics area, and then saying, hey, I want to go down this route?
So during a pathology residency, typically you have exposure to a variety of different subspecialty areas, whether it be neuropathology or dermatopathology, cytopathology, things of that sort. And forensics happens to be one of those areas that you get exposed to. And the medical examiner's office in Detroit was not too far from where I did my residency training. And being at the medical examiner's office, which had an extraordinary group of pathologists, it was just fascinating because you're exposed to so many different things that you might not otherwise see in medicine. So it was captivating. And so I applied for the fellowship and got that. And then after the fellowship, I've been practicing hospital and clinical and forensic pathology since that time.
Okay. I was just thinking, just like you said, you get exposed to a number of different things there. But do you remember the first time, or was there an early time where either at an autopsy or something stuck out with you? Because I mean, obviously, it's not natural for people to sort of be seeing, dead people all day long. But I'm just wondering how that impressed upon you the first time and how you handled that sort of those kinds of situations.
I'd say the first time, seeing somebody deceased was when I was in college. And there were cadavers that were available for dissection. And of course, realizing that this is, somebody's father, mother, brother, son, daughter, whatever, you can't help but project, that this is a person who was at one point in time full of vitality. And, who were they? What was their life like? And lots of different questions that would come up. So that would be, I guess, the first part. And then gradually through medical school, you're doing more dissections. And so you get exposed to it, I would say, in a gradual process. But at first, it's, a little bit startling.
Yeah. You've had a number of roles, like including a chief medical examiner for Montana, right? So how has that sort of shaped your perspective on just like forensic practices or forensic pathology in like maybe more rural areas or mountainous regions?
So over time, that's changed dramatically. My training was at the medical examiner's office in Detroit, which is a medical examiner system in Wayne County. But if you take a look at the state of Michigan, Michigan is kind of a mixed system. There are, formal, like Wayne County, medical examiner systems. Oakland County is another good example. But then there are other counties which require a medical examiner, but the medical examiner doesn't have to be a forensic pathologist per se. It could be any other physician, any other specialty. Coming out to Colorado, which we did in '92, Colorado has 64 counties where the coroner is elected. And so the elected coroner may not have any experience in forensic pathology at all. So when I first got out to Colorado, I was pretty alarmed. But then working with many of the coroners, some of the coroners are just wonderful in terms of the work that they do, and they function in much the same way that a qualified death investigator would with a medical examiner system. I think that prepared me in a good way to go up to Montana. Montana has 56 counties, and those have elected or appointed coroners, many of which are the county sheriff as well. And it gave me an opportunity to recognize the attributes that they might have. It also gave me an opportunity to recognize some of the opportunities that they might have for some transition. So the way that Montana worked was a little bit different than Colorado. In Montana, the coroners were obliged to use the state medical examiner's office as their source for autopsy services. In contrast to Colorado, where there's no centralized medical examiner's office per se, but you have a variety of different pathology practices scattered throughout the state. And so the coroners can kind of pick and choose who they might go to. In Montana, the way that the laws were set up, we were able to work in a collegial manner with the coroners. And if the coroners had cases, they would send them to us. And then if the coroners in some instances may have failed to act, the state medical examiner's office could intervene on those cases and perform a postmortem examination if deemed necessary. So there's a number of different factors, but it was a nice transition between 2015 and 2022 when I retired.
Yeah, you mentioned about like modernizing the infrastructure, and I'm just wondering what kind of improvements you made while you were there, like different things that you tried to implement.
So the main office had been in Missoula for many years, and that incorporated the Forensic Science Division. The Forensic Science Division included the medical examiner's office, toxicology, chemistry, latent prints, DNA, tool marks, firearms, things of that sort. So it was sort of an all-in-one package, and that was under the Department of Justice. So we were appointed by the Attorney General for the state. The state did not have a facility to serve, or a dedicated facility to serve the eastern side of the state, nor did they have any dedicated forensic pathologists who were employed by the state. So when I got up there, we established a new satellite facility in Billings compared to the hospital basement morgue, which had existed for many years. And we introduced the concept of a a coroner liaison. So it was a concept that we introduced there, which meant that we had somebody who was a experienced death investigator to help in the communication between the coroners and the medical examiners. And so that helped us greatly to facilitate the work that we had to do, considering we were a relatively small staff. We improved our staffing. At one point in time, there were only 2 employed forensic pathologists in the state in the Missoula office, and they didn't even have autopsy assistants. So it was much different. We increased the staff to 4 forensic pathologists, 2 serving the folks in the Billings office and 2 serving the folks in the Missoula office. We initiated a electronic death reporting system for the state. It was a kind of a bumpy road at first, but it's gradually gotten better, and of course is still continuing to improve. But it allowed for the coroners throughout the state to report their findings associated with death investigation, and then it could be contemporaneously reviewed by the coroner liaison as well as the forensic pathologists. So it improved dialogue and more consistency with regard to death reporting. So we made lots of changes there.
Okay. Now you are in Colorado. Are you in Colorado? Make sure I'm right.
Yep.
Okay.
Back in Grand Junction, Colorado, and just work part-time now, and work with photography as much as I can, whether it's in the forensic setting or landscape, and try to ski as often as I can.
So you're in the mountains. So you're a person who doesn't just deal with it, but you're there as well. And I don't know, have you? I mean, we're going to be talking about some of the I guess high altitude illness is what it's referred to in some cases. But I mean, have you ever experienced it yourself?
A little bit. Nothing severe, so that's good.
Yeah.
Still here.
Yeah, of course. But just, like mild symptoms maybe sometimes or something like that?
Sure. Headache, insomnia is really pretty common with high altitude. But other than that, really haven't had any other particular problems. But it is really common for visitors who come to high altitude regions to experience some form of illness associated with high altitude exposure. And there are lots of good reasons to come to high altitude, whether it's skiing or mountaineering, different types of sports, adventures, things of that sort. That's been much more common throughout the world.
Okay. Well, I want to get into the high altitude stuff. And I think this paper that you did here is actually a really good starting point because you outline a number of different things here. And I'm gonna do my best to frame the questions so they're sort of organized, but I'll probably jump around a little bit. But maybe, can you give us some background on this paper, like when you did it and why you did it?
The paper was published in 2018, and so it was in between 2017, 2016 that we were working on it. Jim Caruso is a friend of mine. He's the chief medical examiner in the Denver office. And he approached me about doing this paper with him about high altitude death investigation. And that was the sort of the start. That was the initiation for the paper.
Okay.
And we were able to get that published in Academic Forensic Pathology.
Okay. There's some interesting things in this paper, and I'm wondering if you can maybe just help me with some of the definitions, because they may be coming up again. But one was HAI, so you got high altitude illness. Then you had HACE, so you've got high altitude cerebral edema. And then the other one was high altitude pulmonary edema. Can you just help me out with those and sort of distinguish what they are and what areas they affect, that sort of thing?
So high altitude illness is a broad grouping of a variety of subsets, which people might experience. So high altitude illness is anything that is associated with exposure to high altitude or basically low barometric pressure. Within that, there are subsets. There's acute mountain sickness. Acute mountain sickness has to be differentiated from what's called high altitude pulmonary edema, or HAPE, and high altitude cerebral edema, which is referred to as HACE. There's some other less common. There's acute illness as well, but that's typically not encountered. So these would be the most common that we would see with regard to individuals who are exposed to high altitude.
Okay. One thing that I was reading through the paper I thought was interesting, because most people know that as you're going up in altitude, the air gets, people say the air gets thinner and there's a little bit less oxygen. But there was a very strong point in the paper that the issue is not so much the decrease in oxygen, but it's the decrease in pressure. Could you explain that maybe a little bit about why that's important?
Sure. So if we take a look, and I've got a little bit of a visual here. It's not the best visual in the world, but this is I'm not sure if you can see it too well. Let me get something with a contrasting background. This is a neutral gradient filter. And if you can see at the top part, it's clear. And at the bottom part, it is dark. And so, the gradient in our atmosphere in terms of pressure isn't quite like that. It's more diffuse from top to bottom. But essentially, you've got miles and miles and miles of atmosphere which is pressing down on us. And if you're at sea level, that pressure is 760 millimeters of mercury. But as you go up higher and higher and higher, you've got less pressure, and so that barometric pressure decreases. So if you're taking a look at, and I'm just going to look at my little reference here. If you take a look at sea level, again, 760 millimeters of mercury, obviously with a little bit of variation depending on the weather, high pressure and low pressure systems. But if you climb to 10,000 feet elevation, for instance, which would be a common elevation with lots of ski areas, that barometric pressure is 534 millimeters of mercury. So regardless of where you're at in the troposphere, the percentage of oxygen remains the same. It's about 21%. The major gas is nitrogen. But as that pressure decreases, as the air becomes thinner, because there's less pressure, obviously, then you have less oxygen available. So, as an example, if you're at that 10,000 feet elevation, you're seeing a 29% decrease in the amount of oxygen that's available, which would be, the equivalent of, instead of inspiring 21% oxygen at sea level, it's more like 15%. So it's a significant decrease in the amount of oxygen that's available.
Okay. Yeah, there was an interesting comment in the paper. I think it says it there, but it says 15 to 40% of people traveling to Colorado from elevations less than 914 meters or 3,000 feet will develop AMS when they arrive and stay overnight at an elevation of about 2,400 meters or about 8,000 feet or higher. So that, 40% of the people is a lot of people. So
it is.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And of course, it's the difference, right? So what about acclimation? Like people, like how much time or at what elevation should people, like maybe like people that go on these, whatever, Everest, they're climbing Everest or whatever, and they always talk about, acclimating or whatever. Are there some general guidelines on how long, at what elevation, or things like that, like what they can do?
Sure. So if you took somebody who's at sea level, and if you immediately transported them up to the top of Mount Everest, they would pass away. They would die as a consequence of acute altitude illness. But you can't do that. Takes time to acclimate. So what happens with regard to high altitude illness is that when you move to a higher elevation and you're inspiring less oxygen, the body will sense that. And when it senses that, because of decreased oxygen, you've got a receptor in the body for oxygen, the carotid body receptors. And it's going to see that there's less oxygen in the blood, and it's going to tell you to breathe more. And so that's good because you're getting more oxygen. But the secondary component to that is that as you're breathing more, as you're ventilating your lungs more, you're also blowing off more carbon dioxide because your breathing rate increases. And not only do your breathing rate increases, but the amount that you're breathing, you're taking a deep breath in, you're ventilating, you're getting rid of that carbon dioxide. And when you get rid of that carbon dioxide, that's part of a pH buffer system in the body. So if you take a look at carbon dioxide and water, it will go back and forth between carbonic acid, which would be obviously the gas dissolved in water. You could say it's like seltzer. But then the carbonic acid, it goes back and forth between bicarbonate, which is a base, as opposed to carbonic acid, which is a weak acid. And so when the person starts blowing off more and more carbon dioxide, you're losing that acid component in your blood. And it's not being offset by an equal loss of bicarbonate. And so your pH starts to increase. So you develop what's called a respiratory alkalosis. And that respiratory alkalosis is a stronger factor in terms of how it controls our respiration with centers in the brainstem. And so once the respiratory alkalosis begins, because you're blowing off too much carbon dioxide, it stops you from breathing, or it doesn't stop you from breathing, entirely, but it reduces that increase that you need to maintain the oxygen. And so that's why you develop hypoxia. And when you develop that hypoxia, the early signs of that process would be acute mountain sickness. And that's very common. So it gives you a headache. You may have loss of ability to sleep well. You might have nausea, vomiting, weakness, fatigue. So if you're involved in any kind of strenuous activity, when you get up to a higher altitude, those are some of the things that you start to see. But when you start to acclimate to that altitude, what's happening is the kidneys help you kind of catch up. So the kidneys is the place where you lose or excrete or eliminate bicarbonate from the blood. And so as you eliminate that bicarbonate, you're bringing down that base or that alkaline. Then your pH has a chance to normalize, and then you start to breathe normally again. So that's how that process gets started. And when a person climbs in altitude rapidly and they don't take time to acclimate, that's when acute mountain sickness can worsen and can develop into either high altitude cerebral edema or high altitude pulmonary edema. So when a person gets to a high altitude, so let's say if you start off on a plane in Florida at sea level and you fly up to Denver, you're at a mile high, you're going to start to see a significant change. 1 mile is not really going to be that much in terms of the types of symptoms that you have. But then if you hop on that shuttle and go up to Vail or Aspen or whatever high altitude areas you want to go to, at 8,000 feet, that's kind of it's not exactly a magic number per se, but that's when you're going to start to really see more profound effects associated with acute mountain sickness.
Okay, interesting. And so, I mean, you talked about some of the symptoms that people might be getting. What about when it starts getting serious? So obviously, these have got to be people that made a drastic differential in elevation. They started, somewhere low. They're going really high. I don't know if it's different. Skiers are going up and down, but they're really not going 8,000 feet high usually. But what are some of the more serious signs, like just what happens when it just goes beyond, feeling a little headache or a little bit nauseous or something like that?
So for the skiers, it's usually not too much of a problem because you're not staying at that high elevation. So, I'd say the highest ski area in Colorado is probably around 13,000 feet, at least the designated ski area as opposed to backcountry skiing. I mean, you've got lots of mountains over 14,000 feet in Colorado. But the skiers, usually, the base is, usually between 8, maybe 10,000 feet. So that first day, you may have some symptoms of acute mountain sickness, but if you spend some time and acclimate, then that lessens the problems associated with that. And then, of course, when you're skiing, you're going from, let's say, 10 to 13,000 and then back down. More typically, maybe 11 or 12,000 feet for most of the ski areas in terms of their high elevation. But if you acclimate, so acclimating, meaning, you spend a day or two at higher altitude and you're able to hydrate adequately and your kidneys have had a chance to catch up and your pH normalizes, then you're usually pretty good. The problem is when somebody remains at that high altitude and if they develop acute mountain sickness, and fail to recognize the signs associated with that or how to improve that situation, and they let it persist is when the problems happen. And there's a couple of ways to help that from happening. Number one, regulate your rate of ascent. Make sure you're adequately hydrated. Make sure you don't really exert yourself at high altitude. Some people have medical conditions which might make them more prone to developing problems at high altitude. There are also genetic factors that are involved. So you've got hypoxia-inducible factor, which is genetically regulated, and so some people are more affected, others are less. If a person's had high altitude illness before, they're more susceptible, generally speaking.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're talking about changing elevation, but we also there's other things that can happen. Like it's not just skiing, but for example, there's other activities that people do. So, like, what are the most common causes of death at high altitude? Like, what are some of the different types of things that you've encountered?
So, high altitude death investigation, in and of itself is very similar to any other type of death investigation. You can have accidents, homicides, suicides, natural deaths, and then in some instances, undetermined cases. But usually in high altitude areas, the temperatures are usually lower. You're typically on more difficult terrain. So walking down a sidewalk in New York City is probably not as risky as climbing around up in the Maroon Bells and in Aspen, Colorado, which are top out over 14,000 feet. So you've got loose rock, you've got scree that's sometimes difficult to navigate, and of course, if it's snowing out, you've got the possibility of avalanches. If you're skiing, you can collide with fixed objects. You can collide with other skiers. You can get caught in an avalanche, things of that sort. So high altitude death investigation involves a multitude of different things that people might be exposed to. Lightning as a good example. You'll see the clouds move in the summertime in the afternoons, and you'll see rainstorms and lightning. And so those are things that are more common in those environments. Hypothermia can be an issue because you're losing body temperature in cold environments. if you're losing temperature in cold environments, you might want to do something to stay warm. And so sometimes that means having something that can generate heat that's burning. And so with burning, you have the possibility of carbon monoxide as a byproduct of any type of combustion. And so that has to be taken into consideration as well. So there's a whole variety of things that you have to include in the differential diagnosis for somebody who is discovered deceased at a high altitude.
Well, actually, and you mentioned carbon monoxide, and there's actually a case in the paper that we brought up here before, and I'll just show an image here. But this was an interesting case, and I think it's one that you worked on here. So what can you tell me about this particular case here? What happened?
Sure. So this was a man, an extraordinary father, who was taking his 3 children out camping in the wilderness. And on the last evening, they encountered a rainstorm, which included lightning and thunder, a precipitous drop in temperature. And so ultimately it caused them to seek shelter in a tent. And the father and son were positioned at one end of the tent, while the other 2 children were at the opposite end of the tent. And they were apparently heating water to try to stay warm. And then during the evening, one of the children woke up with a headache. One of the other children woke up and was delusional and hallucinating, and they were unable to awaken the father or their other sibling, and so they exited the tent. And this was at a point a little bit over 10,000 feet, between 10 and 11,000 feet, and they were able to hike out a considerable distance, miles, till they were met with some other hikers and then taken to the hospital. And when they arrived at the hospital, it was several hours after they had departed the tent, and the test that they had did not reveal anything significant. One of the tests that was done was for carbon monoxide, which was negative at that point in time, although I suspect that it was elevated earlier, but not to a lethal level. When the rescuers ultimately went up, the dad and the other sibling were found deceased in the tent. And one of the things that was a question was whether or not this was a lightning strike, because the tent wall near the father had, you could see that there was a thermal effect, as well as a thermal effect on the shoulder of the decedent. There's also a heat source that was tipped over, and you can see that there was a thermal injury there as well. So this became a question of lightning, carbon monoxide, hypothermia. Was there any possibility this could have been associated with high altitude? And so those are the differential diagnoses used in this particular case. And during the postmortem examination, there were findings which were pretty typical of carbon monoxide inhalation. The what's called the lividity, or the settling of blood after a person's passed away, was really bright pink. But you can sometimes see that with cold, moist environments too. So that involved testing. And the carbon monoxide level was above 60 in both of the individuals. So carbon monoxide was the cause of death for those 2 individuals.
Is it easy to distinguish, like, between different types of causes, like when there's just not enough oxygen, or when there's carbon monoxide? Like, is it relatively eventually it's relatively easy to figure out, like at first glance? I mean, you don't know anything, but just through testing and that sort of thing, it's easy to distinguish.
Usually you can distinguish it, but sometimes it can be difficult, and you always want to make sure that you don't get sucked down the rabbit hole with the bias. And so, be broadly inclusive in terms of the differential diagnosis, and make sure you're including an adequate differential.
Okay. You mentioned lightning before, and so I thought that was an interesting one, because I was just looking through the notes here in some of the papers. So it says on average there are about 30 lightning casualties, including 3 fatalities per year in Colorado. And I'm like, usually people say it's like 1 in a million chance or whatever, but I don't know. Is that high? That seems kind of high to me. I don't know why, but is that more than? Well, I guess it depends, right? Because if you're in a place where there's a lot of thunderstorms or whatever, I guess that would depend. But is it because of the elevation? Is it because Colorado gets more storms, or is it because these people were up at a higher altitude, maybe in the mountains or something?
I would say all of those. The state that I've consistently seen with the highest number of lightning deaths is Florida, and so you can't get to a state which is mostly at sea level, but you've got lots of people on the beaches. And probably lots of people out playing golf, and so for whatever reason, Florida and Texas seem to have pretty high marks with regard to deaths associated with lightning strikes. But Colorado is very common. Wyoming has, in terms of the relative incidence, Montana, places where people can go up to a high altitude, you're exposed to lightning on a pretty regular basis. And so this paper that you've got showed that you're picking up is a report of a young man who we believe was struck by lightning after he went out jogging on an afternoon. This was, I think, around, can't remember exactly the year that this was. Let me just grab the paper here.
Well, it's published 2001, it says up here, so it must be around 2000.
Yeah, someplace in there, maybe a little bit before, but he was a healthy 21-year-old guy who lived up in Snowmass. He went out jogging for the afternoon, and then nobody heard from him after that. And so a search was done, and ultimately he was discovered. And there wasn't really too much there, except for and I'm not sure if you can scroll down. I'm not sure if the picture will show up. But if you take a look at the sneaker, there you go. So this would be the jogging shoe or sneaker. And you can see where there was basically a high temperature that caused the plastic in the foam to melt. And then in terms of his external examination, there were a couple of minor abrasions and injuries, things of that sort, which did not have any associated internal injury that was of significance. So, when we look at external injuries, you want to see if there's any associated brain injury or rib fractures or liver laceration, things of that sort. And so everything on the inside was completely normal, except using an otoscope. So to look into the ear, we saw that the tympanic membrane or the eardrum was ruptured, and that there was blood that was accumulated behind the eardrum. And so that's one of the common injuries that you see in association with a lightning strike. And that's because of the very, very rapid thermal expansion that's associated with the heating of the air. So that's what gives that loud bang or boom. So this fellow had disrupted eardrums, hemotympanium or blood behind the ear, and he had this I'll say thermal injury on his sneaker. Sometimes you'll see exit or entry or re-entry burns with lightning, but not always. And so in this case, this was a diagnosis of exclusion. One of the things that you can do with lightning-related deaths is you can take a look at the information which is from the National Lightning Detection Network. And so there'll actually be a recording of lightning strikes in various places. It's not 100% because it depends on the intensity or the amplitude of the lightning strike. And so if the lightning strike is below the amplitude of detection, it may not show up. And that's not uncommon in mountainous regions. And so it's maybe about 85% sensitive. And you may miss those others. But the most important part about lightning is that you don't necessarily have to be that close to a cloud. You can have, how should I say, lightning strikes from miles and miles and miles away with regard to, producing an injury. So sometimes one of the papers that's referred to here. I think it's called A Bolt from the Blue. That was by Dr. Carrington, but it just speaks to the distance that sometimes can be associated with lightning strikes.
Okay.
But with lightning strikes, sometimes you can see what's called Lichtenberg figures. So it's a ferning or arborized pattern that's on the skin. It's very transient. You can see that with different types of electrocution type of deaths.
What about internally? Like, so, if somebody gets struck and, they've got, like, you hear, it's somebody on their shoe, or you might see like a burn mark somewhere on the body, whatever. Is there ever any evidence internally, or is it just, it conducts on the inside, but it's on the outer parts of the skin where you get the sort of the most significant evidence?
Correct. So if you take a look at electric conduction through the skin has fairly high resistance. And because you've got high resistance, the current will produce a tremendous amount of heat, and that's where you see the burning. Of course, on the inside, you've got you've got a medium that conducts electricity much easier. So typically, you don't see too much on the inside. So with that expansive, explosive, how should I say, occurrence, sometimes you'll see clothing that's torn or ripped or displaced. The eardrums. Probably about 50% of cases, depending on the proximity and if it's direct hit or not. And then anything that affects the conductivity on the surface. So if the body is moist, you may not see any burns because it'll decrease that resistance. And if you have decreased resistance, the current won't generate as much heat.
Interesting. I'm trying to think about what happens after a lightning strike, like to the individual. They get this burn and they get shocked. So, I mean, does everything just shut down all at once, or is it just they lose the capacity to do certain things like breathe or whatever, but the brain is still functioning? I'm just trying to think about what happens, and maybe it's a number of different things. I'm not sure, but
so it's its effect on the cardiac, the ability for the heart to beat regularly. So you would develop a dysrhythmia or an arrhythmia. With electrical deaths where the contact may be longer, then you may have more thermal injury that you can see on the inside. Mm-hmm. So you can see it's called rhabdomyolysis, where the muscle breaks down because of thermal injury.
I see.
Not so much lightning because it's so quick.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. You can hardly. Yeah. There's no way there's no way to hide. You can't really run and hide. Really. I mean, you can see it from far away. You can run and hide, but if once it's there, I mean. You're kind of in trouble.
It's interesting when you talk to people who are up there, sometimes climbing the 14ers in the late afternoon. There are some, I'll say, hair-raising stories, like a Van de Graaff generator. People's hair will start to stand up on end. Sometimes they'll hear an audible kind of a buzzing sound. And that's a kind of a warning, like, I'm in the wrong place. I need to get out of here quick. And then there's different things that people will, that don't hold on to a metal rod. Try maybe limit your contact with the ground.
What about some other things? Like, have you ever dealt with things like avalanches or things like that? People that caught up in high altitudes, I'd be interested to know if there were ever any homicides at the top of a mountain or something like that, or anything to that sticks out for you.
Homicides pretty rare, not uncommon. I shouldn't say they are uncommon, but not unheard of. With regard to avalanches, obviously there's the association with asphyxia. If a person gets buried in an avalanche, they won't be able to breathe because there's no pocket of air around their head. Same thing could be said for snowboarders or skiers that fall into a tree well. Tree wells, I think for people who haven't experienced them, it's kind of a difficult concept. But if you have these large conifer trees, so spruce or pine trees or otherwise, right under the canopy of that tree, the snow is really, really soft, and there's not too much substance to it. So when a person falls into that, and if they fall in head first, you're either locked into your snowboard or you're locked into your skis. You can't really free yourself, and so you have that same type of asphyxial death that you might be in association with an avalanche. And of course, there's the trees themselves. So there have been, a number of people throughout the years who have collided with trees. And I know in the last, I guess, 20 or so years, Sonny Bono crashed into a tree skiing someplace, I think in Tahoe. More locally, we had one of the Kennedys, Michael Kennedy, who collided into a tree while playing football in Aspen back in 1998. And then, of course, there's obviously instances where individuals will collide with other skiers that can produce fatal injuries, because the velocities associated with skiing, are pretty significant.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to get up to 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 or more miles per hour on skis, especially if you're not controlled. In terms of other activities, snowmobilers seem to enjoy an activity called high marking. So high marking is taking your snowmobile and going as fast as you can up a steep slope to the point where you can't go any further and you have to turn and come back down. And so when that happens, oftentimes it's possible to trigger a avalanche, and that can be an issue in terms of, you've got a snow machine and you've got the snowmobiler who are both tumbling down the hill together. So there could be blood force injury as well as asphyxial injury if they get buried in the snow. Let's see, what else can I think of?
Well, I got another question for you, if you don't mind. And that has to do with the effects of high altitude on the body. So, for example, like in your avalanche example, you may not find the body for days right after death. So, and some people may be lost maybe for a very long time before they're found. So, what are some of the maybe some of the challenges, but maybe some of the advantages? I'll say advantage, but some of the pros and cons of dealing with recovered bodies at altitude.
So if a person is buried in snow, they're very well preserved. I think the best example of this, and we were just talking briefly about this a couple of days ago, is the Iceman in the Alps, Otzi, O-T-Z-I. So Otzi was last believed to be known alive, about 5,000 years ago. And of course, he was discovered by some German hikers that were up on the ridge. And, it's amazing how well Otzi was preserved. He was mummified, obviously, but they were able to do, essentially a complete postmortem examination. So they were examining stomach contents. They were looking at DNA samples. They were able to take a look at different types of injuries. And of course, there was some speculation that he was a homicide case from some sharp force injuries. So if somebody is buried in snow, they're protected from some of the insects that you would see that are typically in the environment if it's warm out. And the insects that you see at high altitude, do the same things to an individual that you would see at a lower altitude. It's just that the species of the insects are different, and the time of exposure is different. So, if you're looking at somebody who's, in the Everglades in Florida, where it's really warm, it's really moist, the accumulated degree days or hours is much, much greater in a shorter period of time compared to, let's say, somebody who is at high altitude. So, high altitude, just as an example, the Grand Mesa, which is not too far from where I live, tops out between 10 and 11,000 feet elevation. There's some people who are still out there cross-country skiing.
Yeah.
And here it is May or June. I remember actually going skiing in 1995 up at A Basin. It was on the 4th of July. And when we arrived there, it was a blizzard. So really short summer at higher elevation. So generally speaking, decomposition will will progress slower at higher altitudes. The other thing you're looking at is dehydration. So when bodies dry out, when they desiccate, they tend to mummify, and so they're slower at the decomposition process compared to a low altitude environment. Where basically you've got lots of bugs around. It's really warm and it's moist, and things tend not to mummify as much. So you can go from a individual who's recently deceased to complete skeletonization within just a couple of weeks or even less in some of those environments. Whereas in a mountainous environment, it takes considerably longer. As long as an individual is buried in snow, they're not exposed to the insects. Insects don't have any access. And it may be, sometimes late spring, early summer, before the snow has melted off and exposed the remains. And at that time, then insects have a chance to move in, and you can start to see degradation. But again, it's also sometimes slowed by the dehydration or the mummification. But Otzi, is an extraordinary example, of somebody who was, encased in snow and ice for thousands of years, and he was very, very well preserved.
Yeah, let me ask you about training and education. Like our friends, I don't know what kind of training forensic pathologists get in medical school or when they're going through their education, if they get lectures on this or whatever. But are there a lot of people doing this sort of training? Is it fairly well known? I imagine it's a very specialized area.
It is. So it's changed pretty rapidly over the course of my career. I know when I was doing my training at the medical examiner's office in Detroit with Dr. Spitz and Dr. Merchandani, who's extraordinary individuals, one of the things that they had us do is they had us spend some time at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. There was a well-known forensic anthropologist, I believe his name is Larry Angel, who had been there for many years. And when he passed away, Doug Ubelacher, who is a well-known forensic anthropologist, took over in his shoes at that program. And so we went to the office at the Smithsonian for, I'd say about a week or so. And we studied forensic anthropology with Doug Ubelacher and his staff. And there's fascinating materials that you have to look at. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Terry collection, but the Terry collection it's a collection of skeletonized remains of individuals of known age, of sex, stature, lots of different aspects of the individuals that you can look at these skeletonized remains, and then based on what there's lots of discriminative factors that they would look at in terms of measurements or morphologic appearance that would help group characteristics, if you will. So you could take a look at sex as an example. There's discriminative factors that you can look at in skeletonized remains. And then you can look at stature, and you can look at ethnicity, although some of that's changed because the world's how should I say? We have a much more cosmopolitan population as opposed to more discrete populations. Mm-hmm. But that was part of my training early on, and much like so many other aspects of forensic pathology, it's not so that you can become expert in that specific area in as much as you rely on understanding the significance and/or importance. And when do you need to call in a forensic anthropologist to assist on a case? Some offices are really fortunate and lucky. They have board-certified forensic anthropologists on staff to support that. Working in a rural environment, you don't always have that. So, there's obviously some overlap, and the more you delve into those areas, the more that you learn. That always works out good. So one of the pathologists that I worked with in the Montana State Medical Examiner's office was Willie Kemp. And Willie Kemp, in addition to his board certification in forensic pathology, also has a PhD in anthropology. And then the anthropology folks have their own section in the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. So that's the American Board of Forensic, not ontology, anthropology. I don't know exactly how many board certified forensic anthropologists there are in the United States, but in some ways not as many as we'd like, especially in rural areas.
Are you giving courses though? Like, do you do training for like high altitude, to pathologists, or you do presentations at workshops on this? And you said, hey, these are things you got to look for. These are things you need to be aware of. Do you offer that sort of thing?
Locally. One of the things that's really kind of neat here in Western Colorado, Colorado Mesa University has a facility known as the Forensic Investigation Research Station. And the first person to work with the office was Melissa Connor. Melissa Connor is an archaeologist who has extraordinary experience in taphonomy. So what happens, after death, burial practices, things of that sort. And so the facility basically has individuals that have donated their remains, and they're placed at the facility, and there's an opportunity to watch how those remains decompose. So in colloquial terms, we could say it's a body farm. It's the highest body farm in the United States, and there's an extension that the body farm has in Park County, Colorado as well, which is right around 10,000 feet. So they can see how decomposition affects those changes at that altitude. And then we can see what it's like here in Grand Junction. Grand Junction, where our altitude is around 4,600 feet, and it's very dry and very arid. And so you can take a look and see how different environments affect the rate and changes of decomposition. Chrissy Badgett she's now a forensic anthropologist, and she's now assumed the role of taking care of the Forensic Investigation Research Station with Dr. Connor's retirement.
Okay, and what about you? You're sort of retired, but everyone that I talk to that's retired is they don't even know how they managed to retire because they're busier when they were working. So, what's next for you? What do you got going on, or what are some of your short-term plans?
Well, skiing as much as I can. So I'm not going to catch up to my son, but last year was 49 days, so that was pretty good for me anyhow. And still continue to work part-time with a couple of counties. So Pitkin County, which is where Aspen is, and then there's a pathologist that I cover for in the southwest corner of the state. Recently, I've gone back up to Montana. One of the pathologists took a job in Bellingham, Washington. So there's a vacancy, and so I've been going up there a little bit just to help out until they get a full-time position. Photography is fun in all sorts of ways. So there is a group called the Biomedical Communications Association. It used to be BPA, Biomedical Photographers Association, but they broadened that because it includes illustrators as well. So I just got back from a week-long conference in Tucson, which was wonderful. Lots of discussion about different aspects of biomedical photography. So it's just sort of a whole potpourri of things, and of course there's always stuff to do around the house. So
okay, so did you run into let's see, Gail Spring, Tom Vadney, Danielle Edwards? I'm not sure if you talk. They were on the Forensic Photography Symposium. I'm hoping you bumped into them at least.
Yeah, they did. They were all there, and really was a great week. And Tom Vadney in particular, it was great meeting him because he has obviously he's got an engineering background similar to yourself, but is passionate about photography. And Tom had spent a good bit of time with some people that I've also spent a good bit of time. Charlie Kramer. So if you like landscape photography, charleskramer.com. He's really an extraordinary guy in terms of his work. And John Sexton, who used to be an assistant and ultimately a consultant to Ansel Adams. So Tom and I both had spent a good bit of time with Charlie and with John. Charlie's pretty extraordinary. He started off as in black and white photography, 4x5, large format. He had a similar track to Ansel Adams in the sense that he started off studying music. He was going to be a pianist, and he studied at the Eastman School of Music, and that's where he had a chance to see some of Ansel Adams' work. And then that led to him going to Yosemite National Park, and he had some association with Bill Atkinson, who is one of the early guys with Apple or Mac computers and Corel Draw, things of that sort. And so I think Bill Atkinson, in terms of his knowledge of the computer world, was a great fit for Charlie. In terms of Charlie's transition to digital technology as it applied to photography. Just an extraordinary photographer. And
yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing how many people are in the science fields, but they have a very creative side as well. So they are music or some painting or some form of creative outlet, which is great, because I think it's a great way to just sort of release sometimes attentions or stresses or whatever, but it's just a great mental release to be creative. But then at the same time, you could be working on something that's very rigid and structured and scientific. So I think some of the best people have both of those.
Yeah, it's certainly fun, and it's a great outlet.
Yeah. Well, look, Robert, we're getting on here. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna show your LinkedIn profile in case anyone that's wants to get a hold of you or wants some additional information.
Sure.
And yeah, there we are. Also, I did show the your website here, so I guess people can reach you through here. You got Rob Kurtzman Photography and Forensic Pathology, right? Just like the two in one website. There you go, which is great. But yeah, if anyone wants to chime in, Robert, I'm pretty sure that we're going to see you at the next Forensic Photography Symposium. I think I might have to hit you up for a presentation on this next one. You've attended twice, but you haven't presented yet.
I could do that.
I think so. I think we'll need to do something maybe on pathology or some of the interesting things you found in some of the autopsies you've done, which is fantastic. So, well, look, I want to say thank you very much for your time. Interesting topic. Certainly, I appreciate all your experience and sharing everything with us. And we are going to be in touch. So thank you again. Do me a favor, hang back. I'm just going to say some closing things here.
Sure.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Eugene.
All right, folks, that does it for this one. 107 is done. And of course, we're going to be back. We're going to have a lot of different topics, varying topics and different things. I got a few things lined up. Bloodstain pattern analysis. We're going to be talking about body cameras. We're going to be doing a whole number of different things in the near future. And we're going to squeeze in a few more, hopefully, before we get right into the middle of summer. So everyone, thanks so much. Have a great Thursday afternoon, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.